Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I'm going to tell you a story about second chances and how the road to redemption can sometimes lead you directly back to the hell you were trying to escape. For 20 years, my life was a monument to a single, ruthless idea: winning. I was a corporate litigator, a shark in a tailored suit, a man who believed that morality was a luxury and compassion was a fatal flaw. I destroyed companies, I ruined lives, and I built an empire of wealth on the rubble. And then, one day, I decided to atone. I walked away from it all, sold my empire for parts, and dedicated my life to a single noble purpose: giving back. I started a charity, a foundation to help the very same kinds of people I had once crushed under the heel of my ambition. My wife, Kasia, was my partner in this redemption, my co-conspirator in the radical act of becoming a good man. She ran the foundation, she was its heart and its public face, a perfect, shining symbol of our new life. For 10 years, I believed I had found salvation. I had atoned for my past. I was, finally, a good man. What I didn't know was that my carefully constructed second chance was nothing more than a beautifully designed facade, a legitimate front for an operation so cynical, so deeply corrupt, that it made my old life as a corporate shark look like child's play. And the architect of this grand deception was not some shadowy figure from my past, but the very woman who slept beside me every night, the angel of my redemption, my beloved wife. My past life was a world of polished mahogany angeliming glass, of conference rooms that smelled of money and fear. I was Elia's thorn and my name was a weapon. I didn't argue cases, I ended them. I was a specialist in hostile takeovers and strategic bankruptcies. I didn't see people or livelihoods. I saw assets, liabilities, and leverage points. My soul was a wasteland, but my bank account was a thriving metropolis. I had everything a man could want and nothing a man could need. Kasia was with me through it all. She was the perfect corporate wife, beautiful, intelligent, and blessed with a social grace that could charm a rattlesnake. She hosted the fundraisers. She remembered the names of the board members' children. She was the velvet glove on my iron fist. I thought she loved me for my strength, for my success. I never stopped to consider that perhaps what she truly admired was my ruthlessness. The change, when it came, was not a lightning bolt but a slow, creeping cancer of the soul. It was the look in the eyes of a man whose family business I had just dismembered in a courtroom, a look of such profound, hollowed-out despair that it breached the walls of my carefully constructed indifference. I went home that night to my penthouse apartment, looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time I saw not a winner but a monster, and I broke. My atonement was as extreme as my ambition had been. I didn't just retire, I committed a form of professional suicide. I resigned from my firm, sold my partnership, and liquidated every asset I owned. The penthouse, the sports cars, the art collection, the portfolio of stocks and bonds. I turned it all into cash. It was a staggering sum, a monument to a lifetime of avarice, and I decided to give it all away. That was the birth of the Phoenix Foundation. The name was my idea, a symbol of my own desire to rise from the ashes of my former self. The mission was simple: to provide legal aid, financial counseling, and startup grants to small businesses and families who were being crushed by the very same corporate Goliaths I used to represent. It was a direct, head-on attempt to undo the kind of damage I had spent my career inflicting. Kasia's reaction was my confirmation that I was doing the right thing. She didn't question my sanity. She didn't mourn the loss of our lavish lifestyle. She embraced my transformation with a passion that seemed to eclipse my own. She wept with joy, telling me that this was the man she had always known was hiding beneath the surface. She threw herself into the creation of the foundation, her business acumen and social skills proving to be invaluable. It was her idea that she should be the one to run it. "You are the soul of this, Elias," she had said, her eyes shining with a sincerity that I would have staked my life on. "But you carry the scars of the past. Let me be the face, the administrator. Let me handle the ugly, practical world of fundraising and operations so you can be what you need to be, the inspiration." It made perfect sense. I became the reclusive founder, the quiet moral compass of the organization. She became the brilliant, charismatic executive director, and she was a natural. Under her leadership, the Phoenix Foundation became a staggering success. She was a masterful fundraiser, her passion and beauty inspiring incredible generosity from donors. The foundation grew, its reputation for integrity and effectiveness becoming a gold standard in the philanthropic community. We helped hundreds, then thousands of people. We saved businesses, we prevented foreclosures, we gave people a second chance. And with every success story, I felt a piece of my own blackened soul being scrubbed clean. Our life became simple, quiet, and deeply meaningful. We lived in a modest house, we drove a sensible car, and our wealth was measured in the lives we had changed. I had never been happier. I had never felt more at peace. My trust in Kasia was absolute. She was not just my wife. She was my partner in salvation, the high priestess of my new religion of decency. I had given her my fortune, my future, and my faith. I had no idea she was using all of it to build a secret, hidden altar to the very same God I had tried to renounce, the God of pure, unadulterated greed. For 10 years, my life was a quiet hymn of redemption. I would spend my days doing volunteer work, advising the Foundation's legal team, and occasionally meeting with the families whose lives we had helped to rebuild. Each story of a saved business or a family kept in their home was a balm on the old, deep wounds of my conscience. I watched Kasia work her magic with a sense of profound, loving awe. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of grace and efficiency. She gave speeches that moved audiences to tears and opened their wallets. She navigated the complex world of nonprofit regulation with an effortless brilliance. She was lauded in magazines, given awards, hailed as a secular saint, and I, her quiet, proud husband, was her biggest admirer. My old life, the world of sharks and predators, felt like a distant, half-forgotten nightmare. The peace I had found was so complete that when the first whisper from that old world reached me, I almost didn't hear it. It came in the form of a phone call from a name I hadn't seen in over a decade, Julian Croft. Julian had been my contemporary, a rival lawyer at another firm. He was cut from the same cloth as me, brilliant, ruthless, and morally flexible. We had been adversaries in court and occasionally drinking buddies in the dark, expensive bars where men like us celebrated our kills. I had not spoken to him since I had walked away from it all. I almost didn't answer the call. But a flicker of morbid curiosity made me press the button. His voice was the same, a smooth, confident baritone that still dripped with cynicism. We exchanged awkward pleasantries. He congratulated me, his tone thick with an irony I couldn't quite decipher, on my sainthood. And then he got to the point. "Elias," he said, "I'm calling you as a professional courtesy. A ghost from your past, you might say. I just thought you should know. The donor list for your little salvation project is starting to look awfully familiar. It reads like a who's who of the bottom feeders we used to swim with. Just thought you'd want to be aware of the company your angel is keeping." And then he hung up. The call was a stone dropped into the placid, clear water of my new life. The ripples of it disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. My first instinct was to dismiss it. Julian was a cynic, a man incapable of believing in genuine change. He saw the world through a lens of suspicion and self-interest, and he was projecting his own corruption onto us. Kasia, courting donations from our old world, of course. It was a brilliant strategy, a form of poetic justice, taking the ill-gotten gains of corporate predators and using that money to help their victims. It was a move so clever, so perfect, it had to be Kasia's. I felt a surge of pride in her and a flash of pity for Julian, forever trapped in his own dark, paranoid world. I put the call out of my mind, but the seed of unease had been planted. It was a tiny, insidious thing, a splinter under the skin, and it began to fester. I found myself watching her with a new, unwelcome filter. I noticed the late-night calls she would take in her office, her voice a low, confidential murmur. I noticed the way she would angle her laptop screen away from me, a small, almost unconscious gesture that I had never paid attention to before. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting a bitter old rival poison my mind. But I was a man who had spent 20 years reading the subtle tells of his opponents in a courtroom. I was an expert in detecting the lie behind the confident facade. And my finely honed instincts, dormant for a decade, were screaming at me that something was wrong. My personal atonement had a price. I had to use the skills of the devil to do God's work. I had to become the shark again, if only for a little while, to investigate the saint I was married to. My investigation began with the Foundation's public records, the annual reports and donor lists that were available on our website. On the surface, everything was perfect. The books were balanced, the overhead was low, and the list of major donors was a respectable mix of old-money philanthropists and anodyne-sounding corporate foundations. But Julian's words echoed in my head. "The company your angel is keeping." I started to dig into the corporate foundations. I used the old, aggressive research techniques I had once employed to dismantle companies. I followed the money, tracing the foundations back to their parent corporations. And Julian was right. A significant portion of our largest donations were coming from shell corporations, anonymous LLCs, and offshore holding companies that were the unmistakable fingerprints of the most predatory players in the corporate world, many of them my former clients and adversaries. It was a rogues gallery of the very people I had built my foundation to fight. The poetic justice I had imagined now felt sinister. Why would these people donate to a charity that was actively working against their interests? It didn't make sense. Unless the donations weren't donations at all, unless the charity wasn't what it appeared to be. The next step was to follow the money out. I looked at our list of expenses, the grants we paid, the vendors we used. Again, everything looked legitimate. We paid for legal services, for financial counseling, for a dozen different consulting firms that provided services to the families we helped. But the names of the firms were all slightly off. They were generic, bland, impossible to trace. Strategic Solutions Group, Apex Financial Services, Global Synergy Consultants. I hired a private investigator, a discreet, expensive man I paid in cash from a personal account Casha didn't know about. The act felt like a betrayal, a terrible stain on the pure, trusting world I had built. But I had to know. I gave him the list of the consulting firms and the shell corporations that were our primary donors. I asked him to find the connection. 2 weeks later, he delivered his report. It was a thin, simple folder, but its contents were a nuclear bomb. The consulting firms were all fakes. They were shell companies registered to anonymous post office boxes. They had no employees, no offices, no clients other than the Phoenix Foundation. And the money paid to them, millions of dollars in consulting fees, was being immediately rerouted to a series of offshore accounts. The pie had managed to pierce the corporate veil on one of those accounts. It was registered to a holding company, and the sole signatory on that account was Casha Thorne. The diagram was brutally simple. Dirty money from my old world was coming into the foundation as charitable donations. A portion of it was being used for actual charity work, building the foundation's pristine reputation. The rest, the vast majority, was being paid out to Casha's fake consulting firms, washed clean of its tainted origins and deposited into her secret offshore empire. The Phoenix Foundation was not a charity. It was a washing machine. My beautiful, noble second chance, my monument to atonement, was a high-end, industrial-grade money laundering operation. And my wife, my angel, my partner in redemption, was not a saint. She was a criminal mastermind who had turned my salvation into her personal bank. The revelation was not a sudden, sharp pain. It was a slow, suffocating chemical burn. I sat in my car, the private investigator's report on the passenger seat, and I felt the last 10 years of my life dissolve into a toxic, corrosive lie. Every good deed the Foundation had ever done, every family we had helped, every small victory that had chipped away at the mountain of my past sins, it was all tainted. It was just the cost of doing business, the public relations budget for a massive criminal enterprise. My atonement had been a sham, a beautifully orchestrated piece of theater, and I was the unwitting star of the show, the fool who actually believed in the script. I thought about Kasia. I replayed a decade of memories through this new, horrifying lens. Her passionate support for my transformation was not the act of a loving wife. It was the sharp, calculating assessment of a predator who had just spotted the most incredible opportunity of a lifetime. She hadn't embraced my redemption. She had monetized it. She had seen my guilt, my desperate need to be a good man, not as a noble impulse, but as a perfect, exploitable weakness. She had built her entire empire on the foundation of my conscience. The person I had been sharing my life with, my bed with, my soul with, was a stranger. Or worse, she was not a stranger at all. She was the perfect reflection of the man I used to be, the shark I had tried so desperately to kill. While I had been trying to exorcise my own demons, she had been quietly, patiently cultivating them. I drove home, the pies report a cold, heavy weight in my briefcase. I needed to confront her. But how do you confront a phantom? How do you accuse an angel of being a demon? I knew that a direct, emotional confrontation would be useless. She was a master of manipulation, a brilliant performer who could twist my own words and emotions against me. She would paint me as a paranoid, ungrateful husband, haunted by the ghosts of his past. I couldn't fight her on her turf. I had to fight her on mine. I had to become Elia's thorn again, the corporate litigator, the man who didn't argue but presented irrefutable evidence. I spent the next 48 hours in a fugue of cold, methodical preparation. I used my old skills to build a case against my own wife. I gathered the public filings, the donor records, the PI's report. I created a flowchart, a perfect, damning diagram of the money trail, from the predatory corporations, through the clean hands of our foundation, and into the dirty pockets of her offshore accounts. I was preparing for the most important trial of my life, and the verdict was already in. I chose the setting with a deliberate, cruel irony. It was the night of the Foundation's annual fundraising gala, her crowning achievement of the year. It was the one night where she was at the peak of her power, the benevolent, beautiful saint, bathing in the adoration of 1,000 wealthy donors. I would wait until after, when she was flush with her success, when her guard was completely down. The gala was an exercise in surreal torture. I stood by her side, the dutiful, proud husband, smiling and shaking hands, while my insides were a knot of cold, black rage. I watched her on the stage, under the warm, bright lights, delivering a speech so full of passion, of hope, of heartfelt sincerity, that even I, knowing what I knew, almost believed her. She spoke of second chances, of redemption, of the power of good to overcome the darkness. And the crowd wept, and they wrote checks for millions of dollars, pouring their good intentions into her dirty machine. We returned home late, the air electric with her triumph. She was incandescent, a queen returning from a successful campaign. She poured 2 glasses of champagne, her eyes shining. "We did it, Elias," she said, her voice a happy, breathless melody. "We did good in the world tonight." I let her have her moment. I let her drink her champagne. And then I walked into my study and brought back the folder. I didn't say a word. I simply laid it on our marble coffee table and opened it to the flowchart, the beautiful, simple diagram of her grand betrayal. She looked down at the paper. The triumphant, happy glow on her face flickered and died, extinguished in an instant. Her body went rigid. The mask of the saint fell away, and in its place was the cold, hard face of a CEO whose company had just been the subject of a hostile takeover. She looked from the paper to my face, her eyes no longer full of love, but of a sharp, reptilian calculation. And then came the justification, the words that would be the final, definitive epitaph for our marriage and my 10-year dream of redemption. "Oh, Elias," she sighed, her voice not filled with remorse but with a profound, weary disappointment, the kind a teacher reserves for a particularly slow student. "Don't be so naive. Did you really think this was about bake sales and saving puppies?" She took a sip of her champagne, her composure absolute chilling. "This was never about atonement. It was about opportunity. You walked away from a world of immense power and wealth. You left a vacuum. I simply filled it. You wanted to give the money away. I found a way to make it work for us, for our future. Our future, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There is no us in these offshore accounts, Kasia. There is only you. Because you were too weak to be a part of it, she snapped, her voice finally cracking, not with guilt, but with a flash of long-simmering resentment. You built an empire on ruthlessness, and then you were crippled by a sudden, pathetic attack of conscience. You wanted to play the penitent monk, living in a hovel and feeling good about yourself. I'm a pragmatist. I took your sentimental, inefficient little charity and I turned it into a profitable, sustainable enterprise. The good it does is real. The families we help are real. Does it really matter where the money comes from or where it ends up as long as the work gets done? In that moment, I saw the full, terrifying scope of her delusion. She had created a moral framework for herself where her greed was not a sin, but a form of higher efficiency. She saw her crime not as a betrayal, but as a smarter, more sophisticated business model. It matters to me, I said, my voice finally finding its strength. It matters that my attempt to build something clean was used as a cover to build something filthy. It matters that my atonement was your opportunity. And it matters that the woman I loved and trusted is a common thief, a liar, and a hypocrite of such monumental proportions that it almost defies description. I stood up, the champagne glass still untouched in my hand. The Phoenix Foundation was supposed to be about rising from the ashes, I said. I just never realized that you were the one who was planning to set the fire. The aftermath of my discovery was a quiet, Cold War fought in the sterile corridors of lawyers' offices. The grand, passionate drama of our Galenite confrontation dissolved into the grim, tedious reality of a high-stakes divorce and a looming federal investigation. My first, and most difficult, decision was what to do with the information I now possessed. I held the power to destroy her, to expose the entire scheme and watch as her carefully constructed world of philanthropy and prestige came crashing down around her. The part of me that was still Elia's thorn, the shark, craved that righteous, destructive vengeance. But the man I had tried to become for the past 10 years, the man who believed in atonement, hesitated. If I went to the authorities, I wouldn't just be destroying Kasia, I would be destroying the Phoenix Foundation. The good work, the families we had helped, the very real lifeline we provided to so many people, all of it would be consumed in the firestorm of the scandal. The Foundation's assets would be frozen, its reputation annihilated. The innocent would suffer alongside the guilty. It was a perfect, diabolical moral trap she had set for me. For weeks I was paralyzed. I moved into a hotel, a faceless, anonymous room that matched the emptiness inside me. I was caught between the desire for justice and the consequences of that justice. Kasia, through her lawyers, made her position clear. She was not going to give up without a fight. Her opening offer was a divorce settlement that was both an insult and a threat. She would give me a small, charitable portion of her hidden wealth, enough to live on comfortably, and in exchange, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement so airtight it would be a legal tomb. I would have to become a willing, silent partner in her crime, living out my days on a pension funded by my own stolen legacy of redemption. The offer was a final, profound insight into her soul. She did not understand me at all. She thought she could buy my silence, that my conscience, like everything else in her world, had a price. She was projecting her own pathology onto me. She believed that deep down, I was still the man I used to be, a man for whom a profitable settlement could smooth over any moral objection. That was the moment I knew what I had to do. My 10-year attempt at atonement had been a failure, a hijacked, corrupted enterprise. But the core of it, the desire to do the right thing no matter the cost, was still there. It was the only clean thing I had left. I made a choice. I would sacrifice the foundation to save its soul. I took my entire file, the PI's report, the financial diagrams, the corporate records, and I walked into the office of the United States Attorney. I did not go as an accuser. I went as a co-conspirator. I laid out the entire scheme from its inception to its execution. I implicated myself, explaining that my negligence and willful blindness had allowed the fraud to flourish. I offered my full, unconditional cooperation in exchange for nothing but the hope that they would prosecute the case to the fullest extent of the law. The legal explosion was even more catastrophic than I had imagined. The Phoenix Foundation became a national scandal, a front-page story about the dark side of philanthropy. Kasia was arrested, her face, once a symbol of hope and charity, now a mugshot, cold, defiant, and unrepentant. The foundation's assets were seized, its doors were closed, the good work ended, the families we were helping were left in the lurch. My name was dragged through the mud, my reputation destroyed for a second time from a completely different angle. In my first life I was a villain. In my second I was a fool. Kasia, true to her nature, fought like a cornered animal. Her defense was a masterpiece of narcissistic audacity. She claimed I was the true mastermind, that she was the innocent victim of a controlling, abusive husband who had forced her into the scheme. She tried to use my past as a weapon against me, painting me as the unrepentant shark who had simply found a new, more clever way to launder his old money. But the evidence was too strong. The offshore accounts in her name, the recordings of her conversations I had managed to acquire, the testimony of the private investigator, the wall of her lies crumbled under the weight of the facts. She was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and money laundering and sentenced to a decade in federal prison. I walked out of the courtroom the day she was sentenced and I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no closure. Justice had been served, but I was left in the ruins. I had lost everything again. My money, my home, my reputation, and the last, lingering shred of my faith in the possibility of a clean slate. I was broke, I was infamous, and I was alone. But this time something was different. The first time I had hit bottom, it was from the weight of my own sins. This time it was from the weight of someone else's. And in that distinction I found a strange, unexpected flicker of freedom. My first attempt at redemption had been a grand, public gesture, a multi-million-dollar announcement to the world that I was a changed man. It had been in its own way an act of ego. This time my atonement would be quiet. It would be anonymous. It would be real. I had one asset left that the courts and the press and Kasia could not touch, my legal mind, the skills of the shark. I started over from the absolute bottom. I took a small, windowless office in a bad part of town and I put up a small, simple sign, Elias Thorne Legal Services. I didn't take clients who could pay. I took the ones who couldn't. I started representing the very same people the foundation was supposed to help. I fought predatory lenders. I defended families facing eviction. I helped small business owners navigate the labyrinthine world of corporate law. I didn't have a foundation. I didn't have a fundraising gala. I didn't have a saintly wife by my side. All I had was a desk, a law degree, and a long, long list of past sins to work off, one case at a time. My life is not a story of redemption anymore. It's just a life. A quiet, difficult, and sometimes beautiful process of trying to do a little more good than harm in the world each day. I finally learned that atonement is not a destination you can arrive at. It's not a foundation you can build or a reputation you can buy. It's just a direction you choose to walk in every single morning for the rest of your life. Thanks for being here on Reddit Whispers. I've shared my story, but now I want to hear yours. What's the most surprising decision that turned everything around for you? Your comment could be the lifeline someone else is looking for today.